Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Created Mind podcast, where we discuss psychology and its influence on culture from a Christian perspective. My name is Ashley Hagman. I'm a therapist and adjunct professor of psychology. And today we're going to be discussing kind of what makes up a human and the components that make up a human. And I want to start on just very briefly a more theological and philosophical level, and then flesh this out and discuss the implications that these ideas have in the field of psychology on a very practical level. And that's kind of my goal for the whole podcast, is to be able to bridge that gap between, because a lot of times there's these ideas in theology or these philosophical ideas that, to be frank, why are we talking about this? What does it matter? What is the point practically to my life if man is made up of 3 parts or 2 parts or 1 part? What does this have to do with anything? And it can be easy to feel like, I don't want to quibble over that. Let's just focus on what's important. Well, the reality is that these ideas and the way that you conceive of our humanity actually does have real world implications for how we consider the things that we go through as humans. And that's what I want to talk about today is how the makeup of man can, on a very practical level, influence our approach and our understanding of things that can happen in mental health. So there's an idea in theology where, what is the composition of man? What is man made of? What is our identity ontologically? So ontologically means our pertaining to being, pertaining to what we are. And there's a few different theories. There's the theory that we're 3 parts, that we are a body, so that's our physical body, our soul, and our spirit. And I always get those mixed up, but one is more of kind of our cognitive, our mind, the seat of our choices and will. And then the other one, I think it's the spirit, is kind of more of the spiritual aspect of ourselves that has morality, that interacts with God. So there's that. There's a view that we're made of 2 things, that we're made of a spirit and a body, or soul and body, whatever word you want to use for that. And so that's kind of like the sense of sort of that cognitive part of ourselves, the seat of our will, combined with this more spiritual aspect of ourselves. So those 2 notions are in one, and then you have the body. And then there's a view that we're just one thing, and that it's not appropriate to kind of split that apart, because you can't split that apart. And I think that a lot of these views, I'm not going to get really deep into the weeds of what those views are. I highly recommend, though, that if this kind of piques your interest, that you really dive deep into this, because it's very interesting, and I think worthy of thinking through yourself. But regardless of what you think, what camp you land in, and I personally think that there are very persuasive cases to be made in each one, and I'm not exactly sure where I land, but I do think that regardless of what you think, it's clear that there is an aspect of our being that is material, that we can actually see, hear, taste, touch, smell, and that there's an immaterial part of ourselves. So there's a part of ourselves that exists beyond this physical world and exists in sort of this immaterial realm. And whether we want to further divide that up, how we want to describe the relationship between those parts of ourselves, whether they're parts, whether they're really the same thing, is immaterial to the discussion that I think that I want to have today. But I want to point out that there is an immaterial component to our ontology, to our being, and a material component to our ontology and our being. So let's now get into the more practical aspect of how this theology, or the lack of this theology, can show up in psychology. So I'd like to point out 2 extremes that can happen when you don't hold to this understanding of both an immaterial and a material component of the nature of man. So on the one side is an idea that pops up a lot in New Age philosophy, which is becoming more and more popular in the field of psychology and more popular in just culture in general. And a lot of New Age philosophies hinge on this idea of pursuing the spiritual to the exclusion of the physical. And a lot of this has to do with the root of it being in sort of Eastern Eastern religions and philosophies. I was just recently kind of doing a deep dive into Hinduism, and they have the concept that all the universe, everything that exists, is really just one thing, that we are all components of the one. And so the highest form of being is to be united with the one and to be out of your body, out of the things that are individual and physical, and in the realm of spirituality. So a lot of this comes in meditation. You're trying to get into this transcendental state where it's an out-of-body experience, essentially. And that is what's prized. That is what's viewed as the highest that you can go. I remember listening to a podcast once where someone who was in the New Age was kind of relating his experience, and he was saying that to him, it was more real to him to be out of his body and in this, quote, spiritual realm of transcendental meditation than it was to be actually in his body. And there's a lot of problems that come with this disassociation from our physical being. And they would say, and it's kind of sneaky, it's kind of tricky because a lot of the language that's used is, quote, embodied spirit, that kind of thing. But what they mean often by that is we do things with our body, like yoga or breathing exercises. Not that yoga and breathing exercises are wrong. I think in and of themselves, there is some common grace, some common good that can be done with that. But I'm talking about more of the religious aspect of it that can creep in, and the philosophical aspect of it. Anyway, so we do things with our bodies in order to escape our bodies and get to this state of spirituality, of enlightenment, of being in this realm of spirituality and not being at home in our bodies. And there's problems with that. And so I want to point out a little bit practically of how that can happen. So one of the populations that I've worked with in the past is people who have experienced sexual trauma. And a lot of this goes also for people who have experienced just physical trauma in general, so abuse or violence. And one of the temptations when you've experienced that kind of violation of your body is dissociation. And this can pop up in many different forms, in many different self-destructive ways. So, for example, one of them is like a dissociative disorder. So dissociation means it's kind of like out of your body, where you're not connected with your physical form. And we experience this in a very limited way all the time. So, for example, when you're driving in your car and you're kind of an autopilot and you realize like, oh, I just got to my destination. I have no idea how I really got here. Like you were there the whole time, but you weren't really present mentally. So that's a very mild form of dissociation that's always present. But those who experience a dissociative disorder, it goes to an extreme where you are having episodes where you're just not conscious, essentially, of what's going on. Your body might even be moving, or you might even be talking, but you are not at home. Or you can have dissociative identity disorder, so a lot of confusion in multiple identities, and in order to kind of escape the reality of what's going on. Other forms of dissociation from our bodies and escapism really could be addictions. So, you're addicted to media, you're addicted to a substance, you're addicted to gambling, any number of those things. It's a way of escaping our body and retreating into a place that feels safe. Another form that this can happen in is in things like eating disorders, anorexia, body dysmorphic disorder, where you don't have a sense of the reality of your body. You have a distorted view and a distorted picture of what you actually are. You're disconnected from the needs of your body. So in anorexia, for example, you're disconnected and denying your hunger and the need that your body needs to be fed, and that you're weak. And in binge eating or overeating disorders, you are pushing your body past the point of comfort, of where you're feeling nourished, into the point of unhealthy eating behavior. So you're disconnected from the reality of the needs of your body, and it's kind of a way of escape. It's a way of dissociating. So then you might go to a counselor and they recommend yoga and breathing and those types of things. And it can honestly further the problem of dissociation because you're trying to escape the reality. You're trying to think of nothing. You're trying to not be present in your body and not be who you are, not be your physical and your spiritual. You're just trying to enter this, quote, immaterial realm. So that can have really severe implications for people who are recovering from some of these very serious disorders. On the other hand, we have the pitfall of viewing humanity as only physical, as only material. And this is kind of more of the old school view in psychology of very scientific empiricism. We are just matter in motion made up of molecules. And that's where you get into, okay, so I want to backtrack that there's kind of two aspects to how you want to approach someone who has gone through pain. The first aspect is sort of validating and making sense of the pain that they're actually experiencing, of saying, yes, you really are in pain, and recognizing where you're at and recognizing what happened. And for someone who has had that kind of hurt perpetrated and evil perpetrated against them, you need to be able to validate that what they're going through really is evil, that something really wrong has been done to them. It's really minimizing to say, all right, well, that was just your body. You're not really your body. On the spiritual side of things. And now if you are only physical and we are only matter in motion and we're only evolved animals, we'll look at the animal kingdom. There's non-consensual sex that happens all the time. It's actually more the norm than the rule in the animal kingdom. Physical violence happens all the time. It's more the norm than the rule. And so why are you so upset about it? This should be a normal human experience. And so there's no real reason to say that something deeply wrong happened. And yet we know, we have a sense deep in our souls that yes, something wrong really did happen. So we have to be able to validate what this person has gone through and the pain that they're actually experiencing. And then we have to offer them something. We have to offer them a vision of what things should look like. And if all you have is a material body that exists, then we have, we can say, yeah, we can't really say a lot about what a person should feel or kind of the goal. And there's not always a hope that things can be restored, that you can have healing, that you can feel better. And so that's what's so beautiful about our faith. And that's why I think diving into the intellectual side of this, even though it's challenging, to push yourself into that and to seek out this knowledge is like, it's just so beautiful. And it has so much application to what we go through in our everyday lives. I don't know. It just leaves me speechless to be able to look in the eyes of someone experiencing a pain that I can't even begin to understand on an experiential level, but to know and to be able to trust and give comfort and say that there's something better. And that's why it's so important, I think, that Christ came as God and man. He did not come just as a spirit. He came in actual physical human form and in every way was found in our likeness, in our weakness, and experienced everything that we have experienced. And he was resurrected not into a spiritual body, but into a real, actual physical body that Thomas touched, the wounds in his hands and in his feet, and he redeemed all of it. He redeemed all of it. He redeemed our bodies. He redeemed our spirits. And coming in the new creation will be a physical world where we will have new resurrected, glorified bodies that will be 100% healed and 100% good and beautiful. And so that is our eternal hope that we have. And so looking at someone who has been violated, and we can say that is something that is deeply, deeply spiritually wrong. And there's many, many reasons for that we could go and explore through scripture and I think would be worthwhile in the future. But suffice it to say, we can say that there is something deeply spiritually wrong with what was done to you, but that's not all. That's not the end of the story. That Christ came and experienced all that you have experienced and felt your pain and feels your pain, not just on a cognitive level, but on an experiential level. And he has redeemed it. He has conquered it. And right now we're living in the reality of the already not yet. And so there is a sense in which the healing in this world that we are experiencing right now, you are going to continue to struggle and you are going to continue to experience the after effects of sin and that has been perpetrated against you, both physically perhaps and maybe emotionally. I know some women or people experience lifelong health consequences from the abuse that was perpetrated against them, and absolutely tragic. Lifelong emotional. You're going to battle it. It's going to pop up in different ways throughout your life, most likely. And there is hope that those times will come less frequently and will come with less intensity. And perhaps later, it'll hardly occur to you at all. And that's kind of what we're hoping for. That's the hope that we have. But it doesn't erase that those things happen and there are consequences that's going to continue to occur in this broken world. But we have a hope that that's not all that there is. We have a hope that this light momentary suffering is worth the weight of glory that we will experience in God's new kingdom. I think this also can apply to those experiencing chronic illness, which can be incredibly psychologically challenging. For me, like a very limited aspect, I'm currently pregnant with our third child, and just kind of the everyday discomfort that I'm feeling in no way compares to, I'm sure, what people with a lot of chronic illnesses experience. But it's trying, it's exhausting, and it's a psychological thing that can easily lead to despair and can easily lead to a feeling of depression and of wondering what's going on here and of struggle. And I think it's beautiful to be able to validate that pain. Say, yes, like what you're going through physically actually really does matter. It's not this sense of like, oh, quit crying, you baby, like just find your comfort in the spiritual aspect of yourself, because you're really just a spirit and you're not your physical form. Like, no, something really is going wrong. And yet there is hope. There is more to our lives. Yeah, and we're not just physical either. There is a spiritual aspect of ourselves. So I hope that this podcast was helpful in if you are in a place where one of these things connects with you, if you've experienced some kind of evil that's been perpetrated against you, if you're going through a chronic illness, if you're going through something in your physical body that is not right. I hope that this discussion gives you hope and gives you understanding and direction. And then also, if you know someone who's going through these things, I hope that this gives you an understanding of them and maybe a little bit more of the words to say or the way to approach them and understand them in a way that is helpful and positive. So if you liked what you heard here, I actually go in a lot more detail, especially on the theological side of things in my e-course. So if you want to look that up in the show notes, I go through understanding psychology from a Christian perspective with the structure of systematic theology. So I have a section on theological anthropology, which is the study of humanity from a theological standpoint. And this is one of the components in there. And I go in a lot more detail of the more theological side of things and how it applies to psychology. So if you're interested in this discussion, I highly recommend going on there and checking out that. You can preview the course without actually buying it to make sure that you like it and it's worthwhile. But I hope that's a good resource for you guys. Otherwise, I hope you'll tune in next time.